With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson. She is Lorrie Boyer. And we're going to come right out of the gates this morning and start talking about an issue that's really important for our livestock producers, and that is wolves. The problem with the wolf population in California. Now, Lorrie, you brought it to my attention that the Farm Bureau recently, at their meeting, in fact, at the end of during December, they made a little bit of a change to their policies on the handling of wolves in California. And so I thought it is such an important situation, but also something that you know a lot about coming from Colorado, where they've had a lot of issues with wolves too.
Yes, and if I may, I'm going to be doing kind of some comparisons because
Yeah.
it is literally almost the same type of issues, the same types of things that are going on for our ranchers in California and what's going in Colorado. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a lot of cross communication on the issue, but it is pretty parallel on the things that are going on. As you mentioned, just recently at their annual meeting, the California Farm Bureau has proposed some updates to policies with wolf management decisions that were actually approved by membership. Wolf populations are growing in California and therefore impacting livestock operations. And in Colorado, same thing is going on. The only difference is what happened in Colorado is that we have gray wolves that were introduced about 2 years ago as a result of a Colorado ballot initiative where voters voted this in, and most of our wolves are being introduced into the western part of the state where our mountains are, where the Rocky Mountains are, which is very similar to California's. Most of the wolf problems are happening in the mountainous areas of the state. There are so many issues within this issue that is just crazy and blows my mind. In Colorado, the one difference is that it was a ballot initiative. Most of our voting population in Colorado is along the Front Range, which is urban and city. So they don't realize what they did when they voted in wolves. Of course, those voters thought, oh, how nice. That's nice. And the fantasy of bringing this natural predator into the environment and kind of that fantasy thing. And so now we're having all these problems, just like in California. And so you and I are going to get into that today.
Interestingly, of course, the gray wolves are endangered under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Endangered Species Act, but they are also state endangered in California under the California Endangered Species Act, and also considered a species of greatest conservation need. Sorry, can get that out. Species of greatest conservation need in the state wildlife action plan. So they are like almost triple protected in California. And that means that there are a lot more regulations and hoops to jump through when you are, for example, a livestock producer who is dealing with wolves that may be affecting livestock. And wolves affect livestock in a number of ways, not just by attacking them, but also the stress that they can pose onto livestock too. When livestock knows that there's a pack of wolves around, when they know that there's this predator around, it causes stress that will physically impact the livestock herd as well.
Yes, so these wolves literally harass animals. And in Colorado, the controversy within a controversy is the word depredation. So it is up to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission to actually draft and release rules, which they have already done one version of them. It was not a good version. Colorado Department of Agriculture is also trying to assist with this, although they are not the monitoring agency. So depredation, to your point, is actually not always killing the livestock, but they might be out there biting them. They can cause injury to the livestock. They can run them through fences. And really right now, one of the biggest issues is that there's fertility issues in not necessarily the cows getting pregnant, but they're losing these babies because of the stress, because of all the things they're not eating. They're running them around. They're out of their habitats. They're separating the cows from the herds. And it's just causing a lot of chaos in that realm. And so the fight over what is depredation. So the last check, and the last check, Sabrina, because this could change again, was depredation was, well, chronic. Okay, let me say that word. I'm leaving that word out, and this is important. Chronic depredation is an incident 3 or more times to one livestock operation, usually by the same wolf or the same wolf pack.
Okay, it's very specific. And like you said, the wording on that matters. It brings to mind several questions like, okay, why do we need to wait for 3 times to protect wildlife or not wildlife, livestock effectively? Do we really need to have 3 different attacks on our wildlife to be able to protect them? Apparently in Colorado, yes, you do. So that's again why wording on these issues is so important, and that kind of goes back into what the California Farm Bureau is saying with the slight changes that they made to their policies with handling. Of course, Farm Bureau does not issue the policies, of course, on handling anything like that in the state, but they work with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to help not direct policies in the ways that they should go. The Farm Bureau does a lot of work to help with our regulations around the state. Of course, California is an extremely difficult state to do that in. But one of the things that they changed, Farm Bureau is getting more specific with what they want from CDFW as far as protection for farmers. And they want to increase what farmers can get paid back if their cattle is attacked, and which is extremely helpful and I think important for some of these livestock ranchers who are dealing with this issue that really they have no power over.
Like Colorado, California does have a wolf compensation pilot program fund. So does
Hmm.
Colorado. I am not seeing exactly some of the ranchers' feedback on that here for California, but I will tell you in Colorado, and I'm going to assume it's the same in California. In Colorado, 2 issues with that is Colorado Department of Ag and Colorado Parks and Wildlife are trying to put a number on what the value of that livestock is. That's one issue. So it's not always what the rancher thinks. And number 2 is the ranchers are hesitant and about actually being paid out. And this is why I would have never guessed this. This is why, is because they would have to have official information about who they are, where they live, what their address is, all their personal information out there in order to receive compensation. They do not want that out there because they are worried that animal rights activists or others could come
Mm,
and further tackle them and
yeah.
further cause more issues for those operations. I would have never thought about that. I would guess that could or is an issue for California ranchers as well.
Yeah, I agree. We do need to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll continue talking on this topic. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
We are talking about the issue of gray wolves around the state and a lack of power for livestock producers to do anything about it, really. And it is one of those issues where California, obviously not the only state to deal with this problem. And in fact, California is not the worst state for dealing with this problem, but it is still an issue for some of our livestock producers. Now, the number of wolves that we have in the state, we're told that there's something around 70 wolves that we know of. And those are wolves that in packs that are being monitored and that kind of thing. Then there are some other lone wolves out there that the state is not able to monitor or count or anything like that. So it's likely that there are many more than we know of, but we do know of 70-ish. And there have been about, I think the last number I saw was about 45 attacks on livestock around the state. And so it is a problem that some of our livestock producers are facing, and there's very little that they can do about it.
We talked about compensation for livestock owners who either lose or their animals are endangered. Sometimes they don't actually lose the animals. Sometimes you have to have a veterinary bill to come out there and fix your animal up after they've been attacked. So there is that. But other costs for wolves are crazy. They're astronomical. It costs a lot just to move a wolf from one area to another. I'm not sure how much that is occurring in California, but I would guess it is in some areas. Just to have I don't know what the right word is, but I like an animal carrier is specific for a wolf. They eat specific diets that are actually being fed when they're moved, not just livestock, but the health the care, the tracking devices, the employees and the personnel it takes to move these wolves, the feasibility studies, all those things come into play. And the costs are just astronomical. Those are things I hadn't thought about quite as much until I started really diving in and covering some of these stories with our ranchers in Western Colorado. But they have to have special devices just to be able to move these animals around the state.
Yes, and it takes a whole nother division of people who are going to do that as well. So it's not a small feat. It's expensive. And we had talked about the compensation for livestock producers. We had mentioned it. And one thing that I do know is that there's not always funding for that program in California. I believe that it ran out of funding, in fact, and because it was a pilot program too, to help with paying some additional expenses that livestock producers are facing because of the wolves, that has to stay funded. And when that doesn't stay funded, then sorry, livestock producers, there's nothing they can do for you. And that's it. It's a difficult situation all the way around because, yes, the ecosystem does need gray wolves, and we do need to have some type of protection for them. However, at what expense to our livestock producers?
Yeah, and to state taxpayers, because if we're going to use deterrence, like in Colorado, they're talking about range riders, but there's other deterrents out there that are being looked at in California as well. Those all cost a lot of money and take a lot of time, and they don't always work. So you have to go to a plan B or C even on top of that.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I truly wish that we had the answers. If we did, we'd be making a lot more money than radio hosts. Anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we will continue to keep an eye on that though. And as things progress with CDFW and maybe as Farm Bureau continues to work with them to try to shape some things that'll work better for our livestock producers, we will keep our eye on that as well. For now, though, we do need to take another break and then Lorrie will be back. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She is Lorrie Boyer, and we'll be back in just a moment. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. So what kind of challenges could farmers face when transitioning from traditional nitrogen-based fertilizers to humate-based solutions?
That's the fun part about this is the humates and humic acids, while they are certified organic products, the interesting part is most of the users are conventional users. They continue to use their conventional practices, and they are adding them to supplement and help retain that nutrient and make it last longer. So you're using them similar to how you would a urease inhibitor or other products. You're adding them to your current application without much change.
There was research that showed humates can decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. Can you tell me more about that research?
Yeah, so it does vary by soil type and texture. And so I think farmers should look at that research and say, okay, will I get 30%? And that's going to vary by soil type and texture. Qualify that with your soil type and make sure that it's relative to your operation.
And then beyond emission reductions, how do humates enhance soil vitality and structure, looking long term for the agricultural production?
Farmers talk about soil organic matter, and that's where the conversation ends. We got low soil organic matter, and they really don't dive into what the components of soil organic matter are. The soil organic matter has two pools. You have an active pool and a passive pool, and the active pool being those components that are being actively degraded by soil microbes. And you also have the passive pool, which is the leftovers. Those the organic acids have been degraded by microbes and are stable and are no longer susceptible to degradation. In that pool, you find humic acids, fulvic acids, and humin. And that's the deposits that we mine. So these are ancient plant deposits that are fully degraded. Humates are contributing to your passive fraction of your soil organic matter, which does a few things for your soil. Improves soil texture, which impacts water conservation, nutrient retention, and in addition to it just loosening up the soil and aiding roots to penetrate the soil better, getting access to more air, oxygen, and water.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lorrie Boyer.
I'm visiting here today with John Sandbakken. He is the Executive Director of the National Sunflower Association, and we'll be talking about seed production in California. But first, in general, how did sunflower harvest wrap up this past year, John?
Lorrie, thank you for having me on your program today. You know, I think harvest went really well. We didn't have a lot of delays this year. Overall, I would say most states, we were ahead about a week, maybe 10 days ahead of normal, as far as harvest goes, and yields look good. Quality looks excellent in most cases. And so I'd say we have a nice crop. It's much lower than we had last year. We had a reduction in our acres, but overall, what was harvested looks really nice.
Any surprises at all?
Not at this time. I would say, in a lot of cases, actually, the biggest surprise was that in the Northern Plains states, where our planting was a little bit later than normal. We had kind of a late spring, and then we had a little bit of rain, and so that slowed things down. So the crop was kind of behind as far as its development, and so we were a little bit concerned about that. But man, we had some really warm weather in September, October, and things caught up, and actually we ended up getting ahead of normal, getting done harvested. So it turned out great.
I want to ask, we talk a lot about the Midwest and this area having sunflowers. Do you have sunflowers like out in the Pacific area, the Pacific Northwest area?
As far as that region and in California, it's mainly seed production. That's where the hybrid seed is produced. A lot of people see the USDA stats and think, oh, California is a big production state, but that's where all the hybrid seed is produced in the valley. And then also there is some seed production in Idaho and in Washington. It's one of those things where the seed companies are kind of, moving around a little bit, finding other locations to kind of diversify some of their risk.
Why are those areas ideal for seed production?
What you want to have for hybrid seed production is you want to be in a place where the seeds can't cross-pollinate with other sunflowers, and those regions, they have real specific rules as to what you can plant within a so many mile radius of all the different fields. And it just really segregates out the crop really nice, because Idaho's not a producer, neither is Washington, and the crops that surround sunflower really wouldn't affect it as far as pollinating it and taking away some of the traits that the plant would normally have. So it just, those reasons work out well. The climate is really good. I mean, they're drier climates where they plant them, so we don't have disease issues when they're being produced, and it just really, it's a win-win situation for that whole region.
Wow. Okay. And then one other question is, you mentioned different varieties. How many different varieties would you say, just approximately?
Oh, wow. I couldn't even give you a guess. I mean, there's got to be, for hybrid seed, when you look across all the companies, and then confection seed, we're looking at about 100, probably 150 different hybrids, I'm sure that are produced, because not all the hybrids that are grown in this region are for the US. There are also some that are bagged and exported to other markets as well.
And is there any organic seed that is produced for sunflowers?
There is some organic seed that is produced. They would be kind of in that same situation, but the organic market for sunflower is pretty small. Maybe we have 1% of our acreage is organic, and it's one of those things that to grow sunflower, we're really attracted for insects, and you just can't have that insect damage. And so to do organics, if you can't use any kind of insecticides, that makes it kind of difficult. Yeah.
Overall, what about prices on sunflowers? How have they been? How do you expect they'll be going into the new year?
Well, there's a real positive story right there. Our market kind of, we had a lot of excess production in 2023, super large crop in 2022. And so our prices kind of bottomed out in March. We're about like at $12.50 a hundredweight at the crush plants. And right now we're sitting at $21 a hundredweight for nearby prices for sunflower at the crush plants. And for new crop, we've continued to move higher. We're sitting at right around 22.20 in the high plains for new crop sunflowers. And so we're really on an uptrend right now. Obviously, with less stocks, less production, it's making sunflower very attractive, and the market is making sure to secure the supplies that they need. And we've seen that reflected in the uptrended prices.
And you expect that to continue into the new year?
Yeah, definitely. We're going to stay strong. I mean, anytime you see a significant reduction in acres, I can't see that falling back unless there's some type of a black swan event that we're just not aware of right now. But I mean, honestly, I really think that the harvest low was set back in March, which is kind of funny because normally at harvest, we see some pressure, but not this year. And and everything I see is that it will continue to be an uptrend in prices, and at least they're going to remain firm. Is definitely going to do that. So,
John, what are some new projects and initiatives that you are working on or will be working on?
One of our biggest initiatives that we're working on right now is we're trying to get more resources put into the USDA Agriculture Research Service research program for sunflower. As far as varieties that are being developed, there's been a lot of consolidation with hybrid seed companies around the world, and they're moving a lot of their breeding work offshore into other countries. And we really have right now in the U.S. just two breeders that are breeding sunflower. The other companies they're still selling their seed here, but what we want to see is more attention dedicated to varieties that really work well here in the Great Plains in the U.S. Both in the northern plains and in the high plains. And so what we're trying to do is work with Congress to get some funding put into place to enhance that breeding program, so that what we can do is get their product, their germplasm, when they send out to the private seed companies at that pre-commercial level. Basically where they would have to do is just cross the two plants to create a new hybrid, and we can get hybrids faster and get that more into the producer's hands. And so that's been our big push, is to try to get that done. And
John Sandbakken, Executive Director of the National Sunflower Association, my guest in the first part of the show. We'll take a break and be back with some information from Farmers Business Network. I'm Lorrie Boyer. Welcome back to the show here today. Once again, I'm Lorrie Boyer, and I am now visiting with Charles Barron. He is the co-founder of Farmers Business Network. FBN has new technology out in the form of artificial insemination. Tell me about this new chatbot technology, Charles.
Yeah, well, great to be with you, Lorrie. So first, a little bit about FBN. So FBN is a network of farms, and we started about 10 years ago helping farmers make more sense of their farm information. And then that turned into FBN helping supply farmers with all manners of farm goods, financial services, marketing and sustainability services as well that farmers can buy online. But at our core, we're a technology company, and that helps farmers make better decisions and become more profitable. And when current sort of revolution in AI at the popular level started, which is really the light bulb moment, was when ChatGPT came out about 2 years ago. We immediately sort of created an ag AI system built atop ChatGPT and trained on a lot of the content that FBN has developed. And so what that actually does is it gives farmers a decision system. It gives farmers an intelligence resource, our AI system we call Norm. They can ask any type of agricultural question, agronomic question, machinery question, marketing question, and have an interactive advisor who will work with them 24 hours a day and has basically no limit to its expertise. So it's really just truly remarkable as to the capabilities of AI to help farmers. And really the question is, okay, well, how do I use AI? What is AI? And what is it in this instance? And the primary way somebody can interact with AI in agriculture is through what are known as these large language model chatbots, where you're talking with an AI system, and that AI system is communicating back with you in normal language.
FBN has created your own chatbot. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, yeah. So last year, FBN created Norm, and Norm is named that's the name of our AI system, named after Norman Borlaug, obviously a legend in the world of agriculture, and his family was kind enough to let us use the name Norm for our AI system, which was the first AI advisor in agriculture. So if any farm can come on to FBN at fbn.com/norm and use Norm, it's free to use. You can ask Norm anything. You can ask it about weather. You can ask about planting conditions. You can ask about markets. It is especially good at chemicals. We've trained it on thousands of ag chemical labels, so it can help you make any type of decisions around the use of that product. So which pests or diseases is the product labeled for? How do I mix the product? What are the right application rates? When do I use, and timing, plant back intervals, just really helping make a label much more simple and usable, which is actually a huge challenge most farmers face when they go to use products. Mixing instructions, etc. So it's free to use, and you can use it again at fbn.com/norm or on any one of our thousands of product pages on FBN. When you see an individual product, there'll be a little button at the bottom that says Ask Norm, and you can talk to Norm about that chemical product, that adjuvant or livestock product.
And is it all just agricultural AI? Say somebody wants directions or something. Is that available in that app or in that?
You can ask Norm anything. So you can ask it anything. You can ask it anything about anything, right? But it is especially good, and it's especially trained on agricultural knowledge, right? And so what differentiates Norm from a general AI system is that if you went to a Google system or a Chat GPT on its own without the FBN system, it's not specifically trained on agricultural knowledge. So I'll give you some good examples of that. There are specific logic that goes into tank mixing of chemicals. There's specific logic that goes into which adjuvants can work with which chemicals, for example. We've helped train Norm on that. So Norm is specifically good at answering agricultural questions beyond the capabilities of a normal AI system, which just goes out and scans the internet on sources of information. And so it's remarkably helpful. So since we've launched it, farmers have asked Norm over 23,000 questions. And the great thing about the way AI works is it's not like using Google. When you use Google, you are asking a question, getting a link to a website, and going and digging around on the website. When you use AI, you talk to the AI. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer back in a conversational way. And you can keep asking it more questions. You can say, tell me more, or explain to me more about what the mode of action on this chemical is for this disease or this pest. And it will keep going and going and going, getting you deeper into any question. You can also say, now give it to me in the form of an essay or write it to me in a 5-step process. And then it will give you all the answers you're looking for. So it's really remarkable. It's capable of passing an agronomy exam. We've run it against CCA exams, for example. So it's quite competent. Now, of course, we're very careful to say it's not an agronomist, right? It's a large language model. So you should definitely always consult with your agronomist. But for handling those kind of first level questions, about basic information, what's this product used for? What are the safety protocols, or what are the restrictions on the use of this product? It's exceptionally good at getting farmers that level of information very quickly.
Once again, my guest, Charles Barron, co-founder of Farmers Business Network. I'm Lorrie Boyer, and we will be right back with Sabrina Halvorson.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. So what kind of challenges could farmers face when transitioning from traditional nitrogen-based fertilizers to humate-based solutions?
That's the fun part about this is the humates and humic acids, while they are certified organic products, the interesting part is most of the users are conventional users. They continue to use their conventional practices, and they are adding them to supplement and help retain that nutrient and make it last longer. So you're using them similar to how you would a urease inhibitor or other products. You're adding them to your current application without much change.
There was research that showed humates can decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. Can you tell me more about that research?
Yeah, so it does vary by soil type and texture. And so I think farmers should look at that research and say, okay, will I get 30%? And that's going to vary by soil type and texture. Qualify that with your soil type and make sure that it's relative to your operation.
And then beyond emission reductions, how do humates enhance soil vitality and structure, looking long term for the agricultural production?
Farmers talk about soil organic matter, and that's where the conversation ends. We got low soil organic matter, and they really don't dive into what the components of soil organic matter are. The soil organic matter has two pools. You have an active pool and a passive pool, and the active pool being those components that are being actively degraded by soil microbes. And you also have the passive pool, which is the leftovers, those the organic acids that have been degraded by microbes and are stable and are no longer susceptible to degradation. In that pool, you find humic acids, fulvic acids, and humin. And that's the deposits that we mine. So these are ancient plant deposits that are fully degraded. humates are contributing to your passive fraction of your soil organic matter, which does a few things for your soil. Improves soil texture, which impacts water conservation, nutrient retention, and in addition to it just loosening up the soil and aiding roots to penetrate the soil better, getting access to more air, oxygen, and water.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
For this segment, we go to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and an excerpt of their Beltway Beef podcast. Here's host Hunter Ehrman.
Recently, U.S. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota has introduced legislation called the Fence Line Fairness Act. This bill, supported by both NCBA and the Public Lands Council, would create a formal mediation process for land boundary disputes between landowners and the U.S. Forest Service. To share more on how this legislation would protect cattle producers and public lands grazing permittees, we're joined now by Caitlin Glover, Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and NCBA Natural Resources. Caitlin, could you give us an overview of Senator Rounds' bill and how it would impact cattle producers?
Hunter, the Fence Line Fairness Act creates a mediation body and a process by which landowners, primarily in the West, could go through a mediation, a collaborative discussion process with the United States Forest Service in the event that they encounter a boundary dispute, a property line disagreement between their private property and some federal lands. And it does this in a way that we really haven't seen for the Forest Service before. The Forest Service has a number of tools to resolve fence line boundaries or other kind of boundary disputes, but it doesn't have a mediation process. And so this bill leans into that void, would create a council, a mediation committee of individuals who are farmers or ranchers, those private landowners, and all of them with visibility by the Secretary of Agriculture to come together with the Forest Service to develop collaborative, common sense solutions to truly what is a fairly simple problem.
Now, Caitlin, as I understand it, these boundary disputes between private landowners and the Forest Service are fairly common in parts of the West. Why is that, and why do these issues occur so frequently?
So boundary uncertainty, I think, is a pretty prevalent issue across the West. Very rarely do we see them come to disputes, though, and I think that's the challenge or the change that we see coming. Boundary disputes across the West are very, very common for a variety of reasons. A lot of lands were surveyed using things like wagon wheels or things that are not as precise as the kind of GPS or satellite technology that we have today. So sometimes boundaries, even when they were surveyed in the 1950s or 1960s, what feels like recent history, right, are off by as much as 100 yards or 250 yards. I mean, it's a fairly sizable difference. And a lot of these lands are vast. They're open. They're in places where you wouldn't necessarily think I need a fence in order to mark a boundary because it is such open range, such open territory. And so the kind of disputes that you see coming now are because we have new technology, because people have access to satellite imagery, sometimes not always accurate satellite imagery, on their phones at the tip of their fingers. And so you start seeing more awareness of these misplaced boundaries, sometimes to the detriment of the Forest Service or the other federal agency, sometimes to the detriment of a landowner. But that uncertainty is there. The dispute comes when an agency doesn't have a robust means or a fair means to resolve the kind of boundary disputes where a private landowner is a detriment, right? Where a private landowner sort of bears the burden of the misplaced boundary, right? If it's a federal agency, they have the ability to sort of say mea culpa. But if it's a private landowner, the agency definitely has the upper hand in a way that really is not honoring the American spirit of private property rights.
So, Caitlin, if a landowner and the Forest Service have a boundary dispute now, what is the current process for resolving that, and how would it be different if this bill were to pass?
So currently, if there is a dispute over a boundary, where a fence line is or where that ownership changes, the first process is to resurvey. A lot of times these surveys take some time because it is a fairly intensive process and the teams are in fairly high demand. But typically, the vast majority of the time you do the survey, either you adjust if there's infrastructure, you adjust a fence line, you adjust the line of the property description in a title or in a lease. It's a fairly administrative process. There are times, though, when this escalates because of the way the boundary dispute, people became aware of the boundary dispute, perhaps. And we've seen several of those over this last year, which I think really calls the need for this bill into the forefront. You need a way for private landowners to not bear the burden of a federal agency's missed survey or a federal agency's incorrect survey. And so this bill would provide a fair means, a collaborative means for a private landowner to have recourse to address their government, right? And it's more cost effective, it's less confrontational, and it really does, I keep saying this, but it honors the spirit of how we think about private property rights in this country.
Well, you mentioned that it's less confrontational. That's certainly the goal here. In the past, these types of boundary disputes have escalated into legal fights and into the courtroom. Can you walk us through how this legislation kind of pulls away from that and helps to de-escalate some of these situations?
So one of the things that we know about the federal government is that if there is a void in a process, they default to other tools that they have. And we've seen several cases over this last year, I think really intensely, where the Forest Service specifically has gone to the most extreme or a much more extreme level of enforcement for some of these boundary disputes in a way that is not encouraging and doesn't encourage landowners to resolve things through normal administrative means because they feel like they're being punished for something that really wasn't initiated by them, nor is something that they bear the responsibility for. When you have a formal mediation process, not only does it have the force and effect of law, right? You have a mediation process where you develop reports, you can provide advice to a legal process or to an administrative process in a way that sort of a conversation and handshake just don't achieve the same end sometimes. But it provides a much more fulsome manner to be able to resolve these kinds of disputes. And unfortunately, Hunter, I think we're going to continue to see more and more of these situations escalate into disputes because there are more demands on the landscape, because people are convinced that boundaries are one place when perhaps they're several hundred yards away. And what we really don't want to see is that in those cases where there is a true dispute, a landowner who has been caretaking the land in good faith, sometimes for generations, with the boundaries as they understand them to be, they shouldn't bear the legal, the criminal, or the process burden for an agency boundary that it's the agency's responsibility to work with them to resolve.
That again from the NCBA. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
Taking a look at some agriculture news for today. What's the outlook for food prices in 2025? Gary Crawford has the latest from the USDA.
The smallest yearly hike in grocery store food prices in 6 years. That's what 2024 has given food shoppers, with prices up this past year for an average of only 1.2%.
And that's lower than the average over the past 20 years, which has been an average of 2.7% per year.
Agriculture Department economist Megan Schweitzer says the shocks from COVID that hit the food system, sending food prices up by 11.5% in 2022 and a very large 5% in 23, have pretty much subsided. But it's taken a while because those shocks were substantial.
So we had inflationary pressures from supply chain issues coming out of the pandemic. We had shocks due to the war in Ukraine energy prices rising. We had an avian influenza outbreak that really drove up egg and poultry prices in 2022. And throughout 2023 and 2024, we really saw an easing of a lot of those inflationary pressures.
Plus, more recently in 2024,
we saw energy prices drop. As of November 2024, energy prices were down 3.2% from a year ago. Prices for raw agricultural commodities, so those products right off the farm, were lower than they were a year ago.
And in some cases, that is still true. So again, by the time this 2024 year is over, the average food shopper will have spent only 1.2% more than 2023 for grocery store foods. But what is the outlook now for 2025?
In 2025, prices for food at home are predicted to increase by 0.8%.
0.8%, not even 1%, just 0.8%.
For most categories in 2025, we're predicting price growth to be pretty similar to 2024 and below long-term averages for most categories.
Megan Schweitzer says that 0.8% forecast is just the middle of a wide range of early forecasts, which do include the rare possibility of food prices dropping below year-earlier levels.
It's not very common for grocery prices to decline, but we did have a few years in 2016 and 2017 where prices declined.
Again, a very rare happening, but a definite possibility for 2025. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The recently released Census of Aquaculture provides details into the top-selling types of seafood for 2023 and other sales data. Here's Rod Bain.
What are some of the most popular seafood items available? If you based that by sales as recorded within USDA's 2023 Census of Aquaculture.
Number one type of sales by species was catfish at $480 million. Oysters came in at number two at $327 million, clams at $222 million, and trout was $434 million.
Travis Averill of the National Agricultural Statistics Service says catfish sales made up 59% of all food fish sales in 2023, while oyster sales accounted for 57% of mollusk sales last year. Food fish, mollusk, and crustaceans all saw sale increases between censuses of aquaculture, with crustacean sales increasing 75% from the 2018 census. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's our show for today. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.